Great. So we're just going to give ourselves a moment to switch over to our business track. So as discussed before, we always focus on two tracks. So one specifically technical, but really touching the trending topics, touching industries and businesses, and the second one fully business related. So that's going to be with Marco Aboav. So just a moment to switch over presentation, and we'll give it over to Marco.
You have that, okay. Okay. Let me just check if the pointer works. Yeah. So, as we said, this second one is much more business related. This doesn't mean that we don't talk about technology for obvious reason, but the idea is to really have a kind of practical angle of, a simple mental workflow to think about how to build a business on top of, let's say, an agentic AR or a generative AI applications. This is the boring slide. I'm going to spend 20 seconds on this. My background, I've been in London all my professional career. I've always been in finance, big banks, smaller places like a hedge fund, so I'm very familiar with all the capital market side. Probably you are familiar with Money Farm. I managed the money there for a couple of years. And I launched my hedge funds in London. And then with all this experience, I thought that was the right time to actually build the primitives to offer as a B2B what I learned to funds and wealth managers, treasuries, and so on. So the concept that I want to give you tonight is really about, how, if you are a developers, how you really want to make a transition from a developer mindset to a technical entrepreneur mindset. This is more about, typically, especially in Italy, we have this tendency of selling, exchanging time with money, right? The typical agency business model. But if you want to move to a knowledge, when you want to exchange knowledge with money, that has a different type of mindset, and you need to learn these kind of lean steps that all the typical successful ones they're doing. And we call it at the beginning the 7 weeks of a technical, the first 7 weeks, but I actually prefer to use the 7 sins of a technical entrepreneur. So you have to go through this. It's going to be painful, but it's going to be worth it. So the first topic that, the first message I really want to give you is that, when we talk about entrepreneurship, and especially these days with all the different programs, acceleration and so on, it looks like very simple and nice, and you have all this freedom. But the reality is that actually is exactly the opposite. It takes crazy hours, especially at the beginning. So this is actually a bullshit, right? The second element is all about, the focus on, what you can control, and the fact that if you don't succeed, it's never the fault of someone else, because maybe you didn't manage properly the risk side of the business, your people, your co-founders, it's always you. And this is very hard to accept, especially when you start at the beginning. The third is actually tricky, because especially when you are, it's a pet project, you do it at your pace, it looks always fantastic, and you have no pressure to deliver. If you work in an agency or anyway, in any dev job, you get paid a salary, right? So what is the amount of money you get per hour or per day? And you know exactly that billing element. But when you are alone and you're starting something new, there is this tendency to forget that, what is the cost opportunity of doing this. So you actually need to somehow bill yourself when you actually start something new and code efficiently. We know technical debt, we know all this concept, but it's very important to set budget and time when you work on your own at the beginning of the journey. Another element that is super important, that is the typical reason why startups fail, is the team. So, this is simple math. When I say, typical 1/3 of your entrepreneurship is development, product, 1/3 is selling, 1/3 is fundraising. So it's very important to pick the people that are actually doing this. It might be not you doing all of them at the beginning. Maybe it's a co-founder, you're 2-3 guys working on the projects. But it's very important to pick these people. And it's very important to protect yourself. So founder agreements is a key legal piece of paper that you have to have in place from day one, even the first day that you actually write a piece of code. You will get used to rejection. This is something that is super painful, but at some points it's like, I think it's kind of makes or breaks. So at some point you get used to so many rejection that you don't even care. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't get the feedback, and you should incorporate the feedback if it's worth it in what you're doing, but the rejection element is something that is going to be super painful. One of the last few things that I think is typically, we have seen this in Italy, because Italy is always lagging compared to the US or UK venture capital ecosystem. Pretty much everything, if you're a technical entrepreneur, if you're an ambitious technical entrepreneur, is online and free. You don't need anything. You just need your skills to build the product. Everything else is free, can somehow. And of course, another element that I always stress, I have office hours, I help other people, launching activities and new businesses, is all about the mentorship. So forget about people that sell the consultancy, but they're not an entrepreneur, because they don't know what exactly is the challenge. You need to talk to people that are ahead of you, someone that raised some money before you, someone that has a team of 10, 20 people. So those are the people that can actually help you to move from your position to actually their position at some point. If you want to dig more, these are 2 books that I always suggest. 0 to 1 for Peter Thiel, the OG of everything, technology, venture capital, whatever you want to define, maybe even like at the government level these days with Elon Musk. And another one that I suggest, because again, the tricky part is time management where you're an entrepreneur. Is called, this Dan Martell is called, this guy has this program, is like the MBA of software as a service, so it's Buy Back Your Time. It's all about time management. So these are 2 really good books to start digging. So obviously, as I said before, I mentioned the 7 weeks is more like the 7 steps. The first step is never to write 1 line of code, never. First thing is, you need to get the ideas. Now, the ideas doesn't mean that, you open the newspaper and you get the ideas, but obviously you have to do your research. Now, the typical paradigm, let's say the things that people are interested, if one day you want to get money, external sources, is always on paradigm shift events. We look at, the AI, EU AI Act. This means it's going to be a lot of compliance. So might, unleash a lot of opportunity to build compliance tools for companies that do AI. This is just an example. So you need to understand the paradigm shift in any industry you wanna focus on, and you can get ideas everywhere. You can be, you can do the look at Y Combinators is the best acceleration program in the globe. You go there, you see the companies what they're doing there, and maybe you do a very a clone of the company for the Italian market. That could be an idea. I mean, there are plenty of businesses that have done this approach through like the last 20 years. You can go to subreddits. So the idea is like you need to get the ideas. It could be public sources, communities, personal experiences. Personal experiences obviously is the edge, right? You might say I personally spend many years in finance. Obviously, I know finance for capital markets inside out. I've been spending from university time to today, I still spend I have the same passion on these topics. Obviously, that's my edge. If you are talking about real estate, I have no clue. So this is a very important element here. The second point is about, obviously, as I said, you start from getting a feeling about something that could be interesting, but then you have to validate with, if there is a market, if competitors, you understand competitors and pricing. When I was researching during my PhD, every time I was coming up with a new idea, there was someone that wrote a paper about that. Every time. This is exactly the same. You have a fantastic idea, and then you start digging, and maybe after a couple of days, you realize, like, no, this is crap. It doesn't work. There are too many people doing this. It doesn't make sense. So this is so important. The third is about, it gets you closer to how you should think as a product guy. So you want to sell, you are selling knowledge for money, not time for money here. So you need to identify people that are very similar. It's kind of an homogeneous group of people that they can buy, and they can buy with the same dynamics. So that's what is called the ideal customer profile. You sell to real estate agents, you want to have the real estate agents. You don't want to have people that do this, on part-time or different activities around that kind of specific target. I sell to funds or wealth managers. That's my target. I don't do any, peripheral type of customers target. So we move to the second. So we have an idea, we understand the competitors, the pricing. We get, after a week, if you have just literally 1 week to study this, or maybe you have a prior experience before, you start with something, you say, okay, now I feel something, and I want to put something together. It could be like a simple plan, but then, because we are all technicals here, and, we are starting to get a sense of, how to use Claude or OpenAI to build, super basic stuff. You need to identify the core features. So why people should buy something from you. The core features, not like what is called the vitamins. People buy things that are not vitamins, obviously. And that's why the focus really has to be on the core features. What could be a user journey for the client. And of course, budget, again, coming back to my initial point. If it takes too much time and too much money, think twice. Always think about, the shortest way to get something in front of customers. Super simple examples, based a little bit on my personal experience. We nowadays, especially in Puglia, we have lots of bed and breakfast and so on, and you have all these people, managers, coming to you, giving you the key. Now you have the box near the house to get, the key without the managers. But if you think about, the interaction we have with, any bed and breakfast in Puglia, there's always someone there texting you, calling you, having interaction. This could be, in my opinion, pretty much automated. So give advice to clients, best places around the location. You just need the zip code. And it's pretty easy. It's coming back to the API. Super easy to do it. Managing the answers, we'll talk about that in the next slide. But it's not that difficult. It's like, what are the rules of the bed and breakfast? So everything that can be in a PDF, you upload in OpenAI, and you do all your. But I will talk about that later. And of course, if there is an issue, you're cutting your finger. You want to talk to the manager for obvious reason. The OpenAI or Claude is not going to give you any answer. What is the device? Pick one. WhatsApp, I don't know, 99% of people have WhatsApp. Telegram is more between a tech community. So pick one of them. And then, what is the time to build a super basic one? Could be a week. That's kind of your time. Cost on software license is really peanuts. So it's actually doable to do it. Now, moving to the next is, like, as I said before, you have to keep it as simple as possible. And from a technical depth perspective, you have to be very wise because you are aware of that, but it's important, again, to go and see with the clients if it makes sense. So coming back again to the point of a virtual assistant for client management, for short-term rental managers, you can build a basic front end. I use Python because that's what I know. Login, the client, the manager is inserting, name, surname, customer mobile number. departure, arrival day, language preference, bed and breakfast address, you have pretty much everything to build the application I mentioned before. Second point, a bit of RAG, you give it the PDFs, the rules of the house I mentioned before, something very simple to make, obviously, the interaction with the clients very relevant when it has to be relevant, like, where is the Wi-Fi or stuff like that. You don't want to open sometimes I go to this bed and breakfast, like I have 30 pages, and then at the Wi-Fi password, then the last page, I have to go through all the pages. So all these things, I just need to talk to a virtual assistant or text, and I get the answer. And of course, as I said, if there is an issue and you have a perception that it needs to escalate, it has to escalate. So again, very simple. It's not that difficult. It's like from a database perspective, it's like 6-7 column really that you have to fill, and you get everything once you have the PDF of the Wi-Fi and the rules of the bed and breakfast. Now, moving on, we say, okay, we have all of this. Let's build it. We build it and we start to interact with the initial audience. At the beginning, typically, people say, especially, here is really about the B2B angle, because B2C is a very tricky business. So, and I don't have any expertise in that, but typically in B2B, no matter if it's your license, annual license is $1,000, $20,000, $100,000, there is always an element of, oh, I give it almost for free, or I want to get the first 20 users. The most important thing is, first you have to make sure that they have no friction, because if you give it for free and they don't use it, it's a waste of time. And then you need these metrics, this usage metrics. There are many cases of these days, if you think about Zapier, all these guys, they start in the same way. They get the metrics at the beginning, they want to understand what is the most successful use case, and then they build on top. And of course, the third element is like, nobody's going to be perfect, even if you have fantastic, your unit test coverage 100%, is going to be some bug fixing for sure. How is the time? Because I don't have my... Okay. So this slide is tricky. Some people say, the client discovery starts always with X, so former Twitter and LinkedIn. So people build community and then build products later. I kind of agree. But the traditional way is always, as I mentioned before, the week 1 to week 4, and then at some point it's like, well, now we have to address this, because if I build we have some people here that they build 20 SaaS per year, you cannot be the perfect creator for all the different communities. So this is an element that you have to address at some point. And you need sometimes a very simple, basic, website, because again, if it's an app or it's a B2B SaaS for corporates, typically the way it's going to work is that they want to see a website, they want to see a white paper, so there is some standard rules of the game. And social media, of course, it depends on what you're doing. Like in my case, is senior professional. In finance, it's all about LinkedIn, a bit of Twitter. Nobody cares about Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, maybe, but it depends on the business. And then another thing that is very important to stress is when people talk about inbound, outbound. So inbound means you create content, you attract people to your website, whatever you app. Outbound is you have sales, reaching, chasing. Clients. Now, these days, these two things is becoming very blurred, and sometimes very mixed. There are some, for instance, just to give an example, you create great content today, not in Europe because of the regulation, but from a website, I can tell you already, what is the LinkedIn profile of the visitor, and you can get it to Slack. So you create content, but then you have a very smart way to do the outbound instead of someone reaching random people out there. So even the inbound, outbound is becoming super technical. It's not some kind of, oh, I think I'm gonna sell, what's the forecast for the next quarter? And I think, some sales guys out there saying, hey, you're gonna sell 50 licenses or 100 licenses is very far from that. It's becoming super technical. Everything is becoming super technical. So these three things is, again, the brand building is something that at some point you get used to it, and you have to really focus on your social media targets, having, a clear, sometimes when you go to websites, I see like, even my website is like, it's frontier AR for financial services. It doesn't mean anything. Why? Because I found the clients in different ways. But if you are selling something and nobody knows you, so many times you go to an AI product and you don't understand what they do. They use very lingo, very, hyped terms, and you have no clue what they're doing. Serving humanity is like something like this. Or you see these LinkedIn CEOs that nobody knows what they're doing. I mean, obviously they have 20 million in the bank account because it's a, US VC, so they have time to develop a proper lean strategy, but it doesn't make sense if you start from scratch and you are not in US. That's kind of my take on this. Now, we start acquiring customers. Now, for obvious reason, the time of freemium type services is over. You need to add a Stripe payment link at some point because you start, you wanna get the first revenues and the recurring revenues. All the businesses, I mean, we can do we have to distinguish here because SaaS is typically your recurring revenues. E-commerce have a different models, economic models. So it's something that, again, I'm not an expert, but for SaaS, typically the goal is to create recurring revenues in your business. So you are live. You try to get the first customers. Could be 10 customers, 20 customers. But this is the key aspect. The key aspect starts here because you need to support them. I mean, every time you launch something new, it's never perfect. If it's perfect, you are too late. So it's very important that you actually have something that is not perfect. People are chasing and complaining, and then you actually work on it. So it's, in a way, it's kind of a fine-tuning of a model, right? So you're trying to get something that is fixed with the suggestion coming from an outside source. And then you reach, the week 7 to infinity. So at some points, obviously, as I said before, 7 weeks is possible to build stuff, but not so complicated. Something that has an annual cost that is very low for obvious reason. I'm building something that might cost millions for my clients. It takes time. If you're building something that at some point you believe the pricing point is, I don't know, $500 per year, is much easier. It takes less time to build. So here is about, these are the four main key concepts. So lead generation is the oxygen. So you have fantastic products, you have no leads, you have no business. Let's say that now you can breathe. The second is, this is not I got it from online. So customer acquisition is like dating. In Italian we say, sorry if I use Italian, but like, for the entrepreneur, it's all about, fatturare, invoicing, right? Is like something that I don't want to say, but this is really the point. It's like the customer acquisition is like dating, but if you have no oxygen, you cannot breathe. So you need a machine that is creating lead generation. And of course, once you have customers, that the churn is what actually could kill you, because acquiring customers is expensive. Upselling to current customer is much easier. And the fourth element is the North Star. So every business, is not true that everyone has the same KPI. Again, if you have a bed and breakfast, your North Star is going to be the rating on Booking. That is the the predictor of your future revenues. If you are very low, nobody comes to you. You have no lead generation. You're not acquiring customers, and the churn doesn't exist because you have no customers. If you have 4 on Booking, you get nothing. If you have 9.5, you get everything. So that's that is driving your business, the future revenues. And you can apply this to any business. So every business has one or two North Star metrics. So those are the futures. Those metrics predict your future. Now, super silly questions. Would you spend your time live on a business that produces 1,000 leads per month, 3% conversion? So it means that I convert 3% of the out of 1,000, but has a 30% monthly churn, which is big. And would you spend your next 10 years building a business like this that has a cost? The two metrics that matters when you have, again, a SaaS business is how much you spend to acquire the customers and how much you make out of that customer over a realistic cycle. You hope you have to have customers forever, but it never happens. So you need to have a certain, let's say, 3 years. So I might make $120 in 3 years, and I pay $20 to acquire one customers. But again, look at the churn. If you have that churn, this doesn't make sense. It's too high. You have to work on that. Because a low churn means, as I said before, you can do upselling to the customer. So everything works. It's true that in general, there is this expression that people say, revenues can solve any problem. Because obviously you can build with the money you get, bigger team, bigger business, and so on. But if you don't control for churn, you have literally nothing in your hands. And as I said, this is like week 7, but could be to infinity. So you can build a massive business. You might sell it at some point. It might work for a few years maybe, and then at some point you stall. Your growth stops, and your margins are going down. So this is the typical path. Now I try to compress the seven activities that you see in any business. But again, it could be potentially your life, your side gig. You have a job, but you actually do as a side gig a micro SaaS that you're selling, I don't know, for $5 per month, and you're building as a side gig. How it is going to end? The reality is, being a technical entrepreneur is super difficult. It might cost you some money, depending, again, what you're building. So it's super hard. So it's not true that, I like to help people, but I also give the sad reality of building a business, no matter if you're technical or not, is very hard. It's still very hard. But there is a way to de-risk your path to become a technical entrepreneur, which is all about, working with people that, again, I mentioned at the beginning, the mentor. So you need to talk to people that are 1-2 steps ahead of you, because the consultant's not going to give you anything. I mean, they have not done the steps to do that. Here is the same. Join a firm that has that 2, 3, 4, 5 steps ahead of you, and you grow, and you join a firm that actually is growing. So all typically people use this, the mafia groups, right? The firms that were very small at the beginning. They raise all these people are, they ex-employees, former employees. They launch their firms, and they raise a lot of money. So there are lots of mafias out there, from technology firms. I was one from Money Farm. I think there are 5-6 guys that did some different financial businesses, also ex-financial. It's a tiny one. I mean, it's not as successful like Facebook and so on. But the idea is to really join a firm that grows, because the firm that grows has a lot of problems. So you solve a lot of problems in the meantime. And you see all these steps that I mentioned before, super compressed. So you have to fix the brand now, next month. It's not like, I have 20,000 customers. The marketing there, is like, my clients are captive. I don't need to grow. So all these things, it's very good to learn them in a very compressed setup where you see all of them fast. And then, of course, you might stay with the company, or you might, create your own company, but at least you learn from people that they did the steps before you. That's it. That's my talk today. So here are all my details. If you want to check, we're building like an open, we call it the OS for financial data science. Is on Notion, is a open web page to learn all of these things. But again, I think now it's time for the Q&A. So I guess, I don't know if you have something from the channel, Marco. No questions? Okay, so maybe someone, sorry? Not at the moment, okay. So if you have questions, now is the good time. Do you have the other mic?
So we were discussing about ideal customer profile, and I'm thinking about how that each customer profile has different operational costs to maintain, and their also spending power. So if we want to think about what's the potential MRR to start a business per client that is the easiest to scale. So if you were to think about a pricing plan for a SaaS, regardless of the industry, what would be the ranges of prices to offer a service that it's good to start, but also scale in the future, considering churn and other factors? What would be your range?
Typically this is a little bit easier to think in terms of an industry where you know exactly who's the buyer, so you know exactly what's the pricing power and the budget. Now the thing, like you do construction, you do finance, you know exactly who's going to be the buyer. When you do horizontal plays, like any industry could be your target, you still need to do the job, but at some points you're going to see that you're going to have a grip with a certain industry. That's what I hear every time people do horizontal, but then they actually sell to 2-3 industries. They have much more success rate there than other things. So the key aspect is always to, before the pricing, you have to understand the problem they have, right? And some of the time is like, okay, what you're actually paying, kind of, to solve your problem, to solve that problem internally, kind of. And the rule of thumb is always 10x. You're offering something that is 10% of the cost for a sum of the parts cost internally. This is the rule of, in VC is the rule of thumb. You offer something new that is 10 times better, cheaper, or better, depending what is your metric, compared to the status quo. So at some point it's like, could they afford, I don't know, $100 per month? It really depends. Right now, if you study a competition, if you study what they're doing internally, how much does it cost them to solve the problem? And I think that's why the shift from software to AI businesses is very interesting, because before you were trying to solve a very small thing with a software, but with the generative AI, you can actually build services. So you try to incorporate a bigger solution. So this is very interesting, because then the pricing power becomes bigger, because you are easily incorporating a bigger solution to a bigger problem. Maybe the problem you're trying to fix is a small piece of a bigger problem for the client.
So more use cases, more reduction in costs of hours they will spend internally, and so they will have more willingness to put more money per month in the service.
Yeah. If you think about cost, is always about if you pay 10% versus doing it yourself, is a very good proposition in general.
Thanks very much.
Any other? No, we're done. Ready for the pizza. All right. Thanks a lot for inviting me. And yeah, I guess I don't know. We're gonna have the next talk anyway in December. So we keep this double track. Always like business and tech, although the business is actually tech. But the idea is always to have more speakers, people that have this kind of product perspective, and they can bring you know the step side that I mentioned before is important to give a sense of you want to build the businesses where are people at step one, step two, to build a bigger community of people that want to build firms here in Puglia or maybe globally. All right, thanks a lot. Thanks for coming. Questions? No. Okay. Go ahead. So we are streaming. We're still streaming. Go for it.
What do you think about what's called building in public, like you do, like in indie hackers, or like in such platform where you share while you're building?
Yeah.
And get feedback about that.
No, as I mentioned before, there are people that are even before that. There are people that are building community. They say my MVP is actually talking to create a community on X or LinkedIn. So even before that, you get this, and then the second step. There are people that are doing that very successfully. It could be tricky because again, most of the things that we see that works are not necessarily super complicated from a product perspective, especially in SaaS with a very low annual cost. So what actually works, the building in public is all about the distribution. You want to find your clients, right? This is because again, coming back to my point about what's going to happen if you have a nice product but you don't know how to sell it, and it's going to be super expensive. That way, you just reduce your cost of acquisition. So it's smart, but it's not for all businesses. It depends on what is your annual, the annual pricing for that product. If you need a sales-driven organization to sell, maybe it's not necessarily the best thing. So it could work, but I think it's very mixed. What would work or not, because it's going to take more time. For sure, but again, if you are a natural, because there are lots of natural community builders that then build products, absolutely. But what I see is that, at least my experience, I follow a few of them, but I've seen many that tried. So it's not that it's easier to build business; it's just a different way to build an acquisition channel. But again, might work, might not work. It's still depending on the steps we mentioned before. If you have a rubbish product, they can give you feedback, but if you don't know how to build it, it doesn't work. Or your competitors, I see, and especially with the building in public guys, the competition is crazy. So people say, oh, I'm doing this, you create all this community, and then you have the incumbent coming to you after a quarter. It's tricky. I mean, it's very hard to master these things because the dynamics are super fast. Especially now with Gen I, lots of people that build in public were more in the software SaaS. The generative AI is tricky because again, what's your hedge? The OpenAI, we discussed today, the agentic, but there are, I don't know if you know Adaflow. So there are some automation that is happening on RAG and all these things, because at some point it's like, oh, it's like almost black magic how to fine tune this model. But the reality is that it's becoming much more an engineering project problem. So at some point you have something very cool, but you're using OpenAI, wrap with a couple of PDFs to do that, and then you get the service, and you might have some success at the beginning, but then everyone is looking at it in public. They know the average person could replicate it very fast. So it's tricky. You have to have some moat that is very hard to build, and you sell it in public, because if you're using too much, just the API of the big guys, it's hard. Because again, the mode in the AI space is about you have private data or private infrastructure. If you don't have any of the two, and then you build in public, what do you have? Just some fine-tuning of a model, or that's the risk, right? And if you build in public, it's even worse, because you get success. People say, "Oh, this is very good. I'm just gonna replicate it, in 2 weeks, So I don't know. It's as I said, entrepreneurship is super hard. But again, it's very important to follow the 7 steps. It's very important to the time management. This is the most important things. You have to get done something. It's not that it's your pet time. You have to deliver in a week. You have to want to build that feature in that week. It doesn't matter time, people around you. You have to deliver, because the more you spend time, the more in finance they say you become like a junk bond. So it's basically the default is getting closer, because you're spending time. Maybe you're using a lot of your personal money because you're not earning, because you're building your own stuff. The more you spend time without reaching the revenues, the more you become a defaulted, right? You might default, meaning you have no more money and you have to come back and get a job.
How strict are you about the 7 weeks and not 7 months?
No, I mean, I prefer to call it the 7 sins. So it depends, sometimes, you have an idea and you start, I was exploring an idea. It might take a week to really understand the competition and so on. It might take 7 months, it might take 2 years. It depends on what you're building. The proxy of this is how much you're going to charge. It's very easy to charge for an annual fee of $250, $200. $10,000, it becomes tricky. 100,000 software license is very difficult. You need a sales team to do it. Million, even worse. There are out there, but millions is even worse. So this is the best proxy. That's why 7 weeks for a $200 per year, yeah, achievable. $10,000, $100,000, no way. All right. Thank you, guys.